On July 25, 1944, around 2:15 a.m., an abandoned, waterlogged field near Maciej, Poland. The silence is so heavy it feels physical. Then the sound of a metal ghost, a twin-engine C-47 Dakota, circles low, its silhouette a jagged tear against the moonlight. It touches down, the wheels screaming as they hit the uneven earth. It's supposed to be a touch and go. Pick up the cargo, get out, save the world. But the earth is a trap. The plane slows, lurches, and then a sickening thud. The wheels don't just stop, they vanish. They sink 18 inches deep into the thick black Polish mud. The engines roar, spitting blue flames into the night, but the fuselage doesn't budge. 1,000 yards away, close enough to hear the clank of their mess kits, is a German garrison of over 100 soldiers. They are alerted. They are waking up. They are grabbing their Car 98 KS and mounting their sidecars. Inside that plane, there isn't a high-ranking general. There isn't a chest of looted Nazi gold. There is something far more dangerous. Scattered across the floor of the cargo hold are several unassuming wooden crates packed with straw. Inside those crates is a broken, soot-covered monster. It's the vengeance weapon, the V-2, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. If that plane doesn't lift off in the next few minutes, London burns. If those engines don't find traction, the V-2 becomes Hitler's final, unstoppable trump card. And the man standing in the mud, frantically digging with his bare hands, he won't just be shot, he will be taken to a Gestapo cellar and dismantled piece by piece until he screams out every name in the Polish underground. This is the story of how a group of amateur resistance fighters pulled off the most audacious heist in the history of warfare. They didn't just steal a secret, they stole the future. And they did it right under the nose of the most terrifying secret police the world has ever known. How do you steal a rocket? Think about that for a second. We aren't talking about a folder of blueprints or a microfilm hidden in a hollowed-out coin. A V-2 rocket is 46 feet of high-grade steel and volatile chemistry. It weighs 28,000 pounds. It travels at 5 times the speed of sound. In 1944, it was essentially alien technology. It was a weapon that could be launched from the coast of France and obliterate a city block in London before the sound of its approach even reached the victim's ears. No warning, no defense, no hope. Hitler called it his wonder weapon. He believed, with every fiber of his fanatical being, that the V-2 would turn the tide of the war. While the Allies were landing on the beaches of Normandy, Hitler was looking at the stars, preparing to rain down fire that Churchill couldn't stop. But Hitler had a problem. He had the genius of Werner von Braun, but he didn't have the loyalty of the Polish people. In the middle of occupied Poland, at a top-secret testing facility called Blizna, the SS was firing these rockets into the wilderness to test their accuracy. They thought the forest was empty. They thought the Untermenschen, the subhumans of the East, were too broken, too starved, and too terrified to notice. They were wrong. Hidden in the tree line, watching every launch with binoculars and stopwatches, were the men and women of the Armia Krajowa, the Polish Home Army. Among them was a man named Antoni Kocjan. He wasn't a soldier by trade. He was a glider constructor, a man who understood the way air moves over a wing, a man who looked at a rocket and didn't see a miracle. He saw a machine. And any machine can be broken. Any machine can be stolen. But here is the curiosity gap that should keep you up at night. The Germans were obsessed with security. They cordoned off launch zones for miles. They had recovery teams that could reach a crash site in minutes. They had the Gestapo patrolling every village. Yet, on May 20th, 1944, a V-2 rocket soared into the sky, malfunctioned, and plummeted toward the banks of the Bug River. It didn't explode. It hissed as it sank into the soft silt of the riverbank, disappearing beneath the water like a prehistoric beast. The Germans scrambled. They sent planes. They sent trucks. They combed the riverbanks for days. They found nothing. They eventually gave up, assuming the rocket had disintegrated or buried itself too deep to be found. What they didn't know, what they couldn't believe, was that a group of Polish farmers had seen it fall. While the German searchlights were sweeping the clouds, these farmers were in the water. They didn't have cranes. They didn't have heavy machinery. They had 3 pieces of equipment: ropes, 6 teams of oxen, and a massive amount of reeds and camouflage. They dragged a 14-ton rocket out of the muck, hid it in a barn, and then they did the unthinkable. Under the direction of Kocjan, they began to take it apart. Imagine the tension in that barn. One slip of a wrench, one spark near the residual fuel tanks, and the entire village vanishes in a fireball. Every night, by the light of dim lanterns, they mapped the circuitry. They photographed the turbo pumps. They created the components. But getting the rocket was only half the battle. Now they had to get it out of Poland. They had to get it to London, which brings us back to that muddy field in July. The British had sent a plane, Operation Most 3, Bridge 3. It was a suicide mission: fly a slow, unarmed transport plane into the heart of Nazi-occupied territory, land on a makeshift runway, load several hundred pounds of high-tech debris, and fly back through the most dense flak alley in Europe. And now the plane is stuck. The pilot, a New Zealander named George Culliford, is redlining the engines. The propellers are screaming, throwing chunks of Polish mud hundreds of feet into the air. The Polish resistance. Fighters are screaming too. They are shoving wooden planks under the tires, digging with their fingers until their nails bleed. They can see the headlights of the German convoy now, tiny flickers of yellow on the horizon, 5 minutes away, maybe 4. In the back of the plane, a Polish agent named Jerzy Chmielewski is clutching a suitcase. Inside that suitcase are the most important documents of the Second World War. The complete technical analysis of the V-2. If he is captured, the resistance is decapitated. If the plane stays in the mud, the secret of the V-2 stays with Hitler. Destroy the plane, someone shouts in the dark. The protocol is clear. If the plane can't fly, you burn it. You burn the cargo, you burn the evidence, and you run into the woods. But Culliford looks at the mud, then at the horizon, then at the crates. He knows what's at stake. He knows that if this impossible cargo doesn't reach the labs in England, the V-2s will start falling on London in 6 weeks. Tens of thousands will die. The Allied invasion of Europe might stall or even fail. He makes a choice. He isn't going to burn it. He's going to fly it. One more try, he screams over the roar of the Wright R-1820 engines. Everyone, push! This is the story of the 60 seconds that changed the war. It's a story of amateurs outsmarting the master race. It's a story of a man who laughed at the Gestapo, a man who stole a rocket, and a heist so daring it sounds like a Hollywood fever dream, but every word of it is true. Stick with me, because to understand how they got that plane out of the mud, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to the man who saw the rocket before anyone else did. We have to go back to the architect of silence, Antoni Kocjan. To understand how a team of resistance fighters managed to steal the most advanced weapon on Earth, you have to understand the man who made it his obsession. Before the war, if you were into aviation, you knew the name Antoni Kocjan. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a politician. He was a skinny, unassuming engineer with a mind like a Swiss watch. Kocjan was one of Poland's premier glider constructors. He didn't just build planes, he understood the invisible forces of the sky. By 1939, his gliders were breaking international records, and he had established a workshop at the Warsaw Polytechnic that was the envy of Europe. But when the German panzers rolled into Poland, Kocjan didn't flee. He didn't take his talents to London or New York. He stayed. He went underground. He realized that a man who understands how things fly is the perfect man to understand how things fall, specifically the things Hitler was planning to drop on the world. By 1943, a terrifying mystery was unfolding in London. People were dying, but the math didn't make sense. Usually, when a bomber approaches, you hear the sirens. You hear the drone of the engines. You hear the whistle of the falling ordnance. But now, buildings were simply vanishing. A massive explosion would level a street, and only after the blast would the sound of a sonic boom reach the survivors. British intelligence was baffled. They called them Big Ben incidents. They knew Hitler was working on a vengeance weapon, the Vergeltungswaffe, but they didn't know if it was a rocket, a pilotless plane, or something even more exotic. They were fighting a ghost. Enter the Lombard Network. This was the elite intelligence arm of the Polish Home Army. Their mission was simple but suicidal: infiltrate the highest levels of German military industry. Kocjan became the head of Lombard's technical section. While the Gestapo was hunting for soldiers, Kocjan was recruiting observers. He turned thousands of ordinary Poles, railway workers, foresters, janitors, into a human radar system. He gave them a specific task: watch the skies near a place called Peenemünde. Peenemünde was a secluded island on the Baltic coast. It was the cradle of the German rocket program, headed by the brilliant and morally flexible Wernher von Braun. It was here that the V-1 flying bomb and the V-2 rocket were being perfected. Kocjan's spies hit pay dirt. They managed to acquire stolen blueprints and internal memos. One Polish worker, tasked with cleaning the offices of German engineers, began smuggling out scraps of paper from trash cans. Piece by piece, Kocjan began to assemble a technical biography of Hitler's secret weapon. He realized before the British did that this wasn't just a bigger bomb, it was a ballistic missile. But then disaster struck. In the world of espionage, you can be perfect for 1,000 days, but you only have to be unlucky for one. In late 1940, during a massive sweep of the Polish resistance, Kocjan was swept up by the Gestapo. They didn't know he was the head of Lombard. They didn't know he was the man hunting their rockets. To them, he was just another troublemaker. They sent him to Auschwitz. Pause for a moment and consider the stakes. The man holding the keys to the V-2 mystery was now prisoner number 4267. He was surrounded by death, starvation, and the industrial-scale slaughter of his people. The average life expectancy for a political prisoner in Auschwitz was months, sometimes weeks. If Kocjan died there, the secret of Peenemünde died with him. The V-2 would remain a ghost until it was too late for London. But Kocjan was a man of quiet competence, that specific writing pattern we see in the greatest heroes. He didn't panic. He used his engineering mind to survive. He worked in the camp's carpentry shops, making himself indispensable to the guards. He watched, he waited, he stayed invisible. For nearly a year, Kocjan endured the unendurable. And then the impossible happened. Through a combination of resistance bribes and a bizarre clerical error by the German administration, Kocjan was released. The Gestapo let the single most dangerous man in Poland walk right out the front gate of the most secure death camp in history. He didn't go home to rest. He didn't hide in the countryside. Within 48 hours of his release, he was back in a basement in Warsaw, hunched over a desk, looking at spy reports from Peenemünde. His time in Auschwitz had changed him. The stakes weren't academic anymore. He had seen the ultimate endpoint of the Nazi ideology. He knew that if Hitler perfected the V-2, the world would become one giant Auschwitz. Kocjan sent a message to London via the underground radio. "We have the location, we have the specs, but we need more. We need a physical piece of the monster." He began planning the most dangerous intelligence operation of the war. He knew that the Germans had moved their V-2 testing inland to Blizna in southeastern Poland to hide from Allied bombers. He knew the rockets were being fired into the Pustkov forest. Kocjan's logic was brilliant and terrifying. If the Germans are firing rockets, some of them have to fail. And when they fail, we will be there to catch them. He set up a mobile research unit. These were Polish engineers dressed as foresters and farmers, living in the woods, waiting for a gift from the sky. They lived in constant tension, knowing that the SS recovery teams were also waiting, equipped with fast trucks and motorcycles. It was a race of physics and guts. The Germans had the technology, But Kocjan had the home court advantage. He had the eyes of the people. Then came May 20th, 1944, a day that would go down in the annals of the Polish resistance as the day they hit the jackpot. A V-2 roared off the launch pad at Blizna, but its guidance system flickered. It veered off course, screaming over the treetops, and performed a perfect flat-bottom splashdown into the Bug River near the village of Sarnaki. The rocket didn't explode. It just sat there, partially submerged in the mud, cooling like a fallen star. The architect of silence had his target. Now he just had to figure out how to steal a 14-ton rocket before the most powerful army on Earth arrived to take it back. May 20th, 1944. The heat is already beginning to shimmer over the Bug River in eastern Poland. For the local villagers, it's just another day of surviving under the shadow of the swastika. But at 6 p.m., the sky tears open. A low guttural roar, like a freight train falling through the clouds, shatters the afternoon silence. A silver streak, 46 feet of gleaming metal, screams over the village of Sarnaki. It isn't gliding, it's falling. It hits the marshy bank of the river with a sound like a thunderclap, sending a geyser of mud and swamp water 50 feet into the air. Then silence. No explosion, no fire, just the hissing of hot metal meeting cold river silt. The Polish Home Army observers hidden in the reeds don't cheer. They don't celebrate. They look at their watches. They know the German recovery teams in Blizna heard that impact. They know that within 20 minutes the Fieseler Storch reconnaissance planes will be overhead, and within 40 minutes the SS trucks will be screaming down the dirt roads. This wasn't just a crash, it was a countdown. The Germans had the Bergungstrupp, specialized recovery units equipped with heavy-lift cranes, amphibious Schwimmwagons, and enough firepower to level a village. The Poles had a dozen farmers, 6 teams of oxen, and a desperate plan. "Move!" the local commander whispered. The farmers didn't hesitate. They waded into the freezing, waist-deep muck of the Bug River. The rocket was a monster, 14 tons of dead weight. They looped thick hemp ropes around the fins and the nose cone. They lashed the oxen to the lines. The mud fought back. It sucked at the rocket, creating a vacuum that threatened to snap the ropes and drown the men. But they hauled. Inch by agonizing inch, the silver beast rose from the silt. But they didn't pull it onto the road. They pulled it deeper into the swamp, into a patch of thick, overhanging willows where the water was 6 feet deep. They pushed the rocket down, anchoring it to the riverbed with stones, and then covered the surface with cut reeds and floating debris. 10 minutes later, the first German scout plane buzzed overhead. The pilot looked down at the impact crater, a jagged hole in the mud, and saw nothing but water and reeds. He circled 3 times. Nothing. The SS arrived on the banks an hour later. They searched for days. They poked the mud with poles. They even used divers. But the Poles had played a psychological trick. They stayed in the village, acting terrified, mourning their lost livestock, while the rocket sat 3 feet beneath the surface of the river, right under the Germans' noses. After 2 weeks, the Germans gave up. They officially logged the missile as disintegrated upon impact. The Germans left, but the danger only intensified. Antoni Kocjan sent word, "Bring it to Warsaw. How do you move a 46-foot rocket through a country crawling with SS checkpoints? You don't. You move it in pieces." The resistance moved a mobile workshop into a nearby barn. Under the cover of darkness, they hauled the rocket out of the river and dragged it into the hay. This is where the high-sensory nightmare began. Imagine a dark barn, the only light coming from dim lanterns shielded by blankets. The air is thick with the smell of wet hay, cow manure, and something sharp, the acrid chemical stench of residual rocket fuel. There are 25,000 parts in a V-2, thousands of feet of color-coded wiring, valves as delicate as a human heart. The Polish engineers, led by Kocjan's hand-picked experts, worked in total silence. A single dropped wrench on the concrete floor could alert a passing patrol. A single spark from a saw could ignite the volatile ethanol vapors still trapped in the tanks. They didn't have manuals. They didn't have specialized tools. They used hammers, chisels, and pure raw intuition. They dismantled the guidance system, the brain of the rocket. They unscrewed the turbopumps. They sawed the fuselage into manageable sections. Then came the potato strategy. The resistance gathered several large transport trucks used for hauling produce. They built false bottoms and hidden compartments. The heavy engine components were placed at the very bottom, encased in lead shielding to prevent any metallic rattling. Then they piled tons of dirt-covered potatoes on top. On the surface, it was a convoy of hungry farmers trying to get their crop to market. Underneath, it was the most advanced laboratory in the world. They hit the first checkpoint outside Siedlce. An SS officer, bored and irritable, stepped out with a submachine gun. He signaled the lead truck to stop. The driver, a man whose name has been lost to history but whose nerves were made of reinforced steel, handed over his papers with a shaking hand, not from fear but as a performance of a simple, terrified peasant. The officer climbed onto the back of the truck. He thrust a bayonet into the pile of potatoes. Clack! The driver's heart stopped. The bayonet had hit the casing of the liquid oxygen tank. The officer frowned. He dug deeper. He pulled out a potato, wiped the dirt on his uniform, and bit into it. He spat it out, cursed the Polish filth, and waved them through. He never realized he was standing 6 inches away from the weapon Hitler promised would end the British Empire. The components reached Warsaw and were hidden in a secret basement at the Polytechnic. Kocjan and his team went to work. This wasn't just about looking at parts. It was about reverse engineering a god. They discovered that the V-2 used a sophisticated gyroscope system to keep it on target. They discovered the fuel was a mixture of liquid oxygen and alcohol, distilled from potatoes, ironically enough, but the most terrifying discovery was the radio control equipment. Kocjan realized the Germans could steer the rocket in mid-air using radio signals. He wrote a report that was condensed into a microfilm. It was the holy grail of intelligence. It told the British exactly what frequency to jam, exactly where to bomb, and exactly how much time they had left, which was almost zero. By July, the V-2s were ready for mass production. The gift from the sky had been dissected, but the patient was about to wake up. The British needed the physical parts, the fuel injectors, and the radio boards to build the jammers. The components were packed into wooden crates marked machine parts. They were moved to a secret landing strip codenamed Motil, Butterfly. The stage was set for Operation Most 3. The heist was over. The escape was beginning. But as we saw in the mud of that field, the Earth itself was about to betray them. July 25th, 1944. This is the moment where the heist becomes a suicide mission. The crates are ready. The potato strategy has worked long enough to get the V-2 components to a secret, swampy meadow near the village of Maciej. The Polish resistance calls it Motil, the butterfly. It's a poetic name for a place that is about to become a slaughterhouse if things go wrong. British Flight Lieutenant George Culliford is currently flying a twin-engine Dakota C-47 through some of the most dangerous airspace on the planet. He's flying low, so low the propellers are practically clipping the treetops to avoid German radar. He has no escorts, no guns, just a compass, a map, and the knowledge that if he's caught, he isn't just a POW. He's the man who lost the war. At 12:15 a.m., the signal fires are lit. Small, controlled blazes in the dark Polish wilderness. Culliford brings the massive Dakota down. It's a Wild West landing? No. Lights, no paved runway, just raw instinct. The plane bounces, skids, and finally comes to a halt. The door flies open, and the Polish resistance fighters, men who haven't slept in weeks, begin hauling the heavy wooden crates toward the fuselage. "Quickly!" whispers Jerzy Chmielewski, the courier. "The Germans have patrols every 3 miles. They heard the engines. They're coming." They load the crates. They load the microfilm. They load the components of the vengeance weapon. It takes 20 minutes. Every second feels like a year. Culliford throttles up. The engines roar. a sound that surely carries for miles in the crisp night air. He releases the brakes. The plane should lurch forward. It should accelerate. It doesn't. Instead, the tail lifts slightly, and then the nose dips. A sickening, wet crunch echoes over the engines. The Dakota doesn't move forward. It sinks. The wheels, supporting the weight of the plane and the 1,000 pounds of rocket parts, have punched through the thin crust of dry earth and into the peat bog below. They are 18 inches deep in Polish mud. Culliford tries everything. He guns the engines until the temperature gauges needle into the red. The propellers throw up massive geysers of black filth. But the plane is anchored. It's a 30,000-pound paperweight. This is the bridge of competence. This is where the amateur farmers and the elite engineers prove why Hitler could never truly own Poland. The Germans, a scout screams from the tree line. Headlights, 2 miles out. The SS is coming. They have sidecars, trucks, and MG-42s. Hitler's buzzsaw, capable of firing 1,200 rounds per minute. If they reach the field, they will turn the thin aluminum skin of the Dakota into a colander. The Polish commander, Motil, doesn't panic. He looks at his men, engineers who spent the last month dismantling a rocket with screwdrivers. "The floorboards," he commands, "and the shovels, now." They don't have a jack. They don't have a tow truck. They have muscles and desperation. The men throw themselves into the mud. They begin digging with their bare hands, clawing out the muck from under the massive tires. They rip the wooden floorboards out of the plane itself. They tear down a nearby fence. They create a MacGyvered runway, jamming planks and stones, and even their own coats under the wheels to create a fraction of traction. Culliford tries again. The engines scream. The plane shudders. The planks of wood are pulverized into toothpicks. The wheels spin, smoking, but they stay in the hole. "Empty the plane," someone shouts. "No," Chmielewski screams back, clutching the suitcase with the V-2 secrets. "If this cargo doesn't leave tonight, it never leaves." 30 minutes have passed. The German headlights are no longer flickering. They are bright orbs cutting through the trees. They are less than 1,000 yards away. The Polish resistance fighters draw their Stens and their old Mausers. They know the math. A few dozen men with light weapons against an SS motorized company. They aren't planning to win. They are planning to buy 60 seconds. "One more time," Culliford shouts from the cockpit. "If it doesn't move, I'm burning her." This is the emotional escalation. These men, farmers who wanted to see their children grow up, engineers who wanted to build bridges, not bombs, look at each other. They know that if the plane flies, they stay behind. They stay behind to face the Gestapo. They stay behind to face the firing squads. They put their shoulders to the wings. "Push!" Culliford redlines the right engines. The vibration is so intense, it rattles the teeth of the men in the mud. The smell of burning rubber and high-octane fuel fills the air. The plane groans, a metallic scream of protest. And then it happens. The wheels catch an edge of a buried fence post. The Dakota lurches. It pops out of the mud like a cork from a bottle. It begins to roll. Go, go, go! The plane picks up speed across the bumpy, uneven grass. Culliford doesn't wait for a safe takeoff speed. He pulls back on the yoke as soon as the needle moves. The Dakota staggers into the air, its wheels still caked in black mud, clearing the tree line by mere inches. Below them, the field erupts. The German scouts have arrived. Tracers, bright green and red streaks of light, begin to arc into the sky, chasing the tail of the plane. But it's too late. The impossible cargo is airborne. As the plane climbs into the safety of the clouds, Chmielewski looks out the small window. Down on the ground, he sees the flashes of gunfire. He sees the signal fires being frantically extinguished. He knows his friends are currently melting into the shadows, beginning a game of cat and mouse with the SS that many of them will lose. Antoni Kocjan, the man who started it all, is not on the plane. He refused his seat. He stayed in Warsaw. He said his work wasn't finished. The plane heads west. Behind them, Poland is a dark, occupied graveyard. Ahead of them, London is waiting for the secret that will save it. The bridge was held. The theft was complete. But as the Dakota crosses the North Sea, the men inside aren't cheering. They are thinking about the silence of the men they left in the mud, because they know that while they stole the rocket, the Germans still have the man who knew how to build a better one. And the Gestapo is already knocking on doors in Warsaw. The C-47 Dakota, wheels still dripping with Polish mud, touched down at an RAF base in Brindisi, Italy, before the cargo was whisked away to London under armed guard. When the crates were opened at the Farnborough Royal Aircraft Establishment, the British scientists didn't just find scrap metal. They found the blueprint for the end of the world. Inside those crates was the heart of the V-2, the turbo pump, and the gyroscopic guidance system. For months, British intelligence had feared that the V-2 was guided by a sophisticated radio beam that they couldn't jam. But Kocjan's stolen parts revealed something far more chilling, and yet hopeful. The rocket was autonomous. Once launched, it used internal gyroscopes to stay on course. But the real eureka moment? The fuel injectors. By analyzing the residue and the design of the tanks, the British confirmed the potato secret. The rocket ran on a mixture of water and ethanol, ethyl alcohol. Why did this matter? Because to produce enough alcohol to fuel thousands of rockets, Hitler had to divert millions of tons of potatoes away from the German food supply. Image archival photo of V-2 engine components in a British lab. Because of Kocjan's theft, the British knew exactly how much fuel the Germans could produce and how long the burn time of the engine was. They used this data to calculate the launch sites. They realized that if they bombed the liquid oxygen plants, the lungs of the rocket, the V-2 was dead in the water. Now let's look at the what if. This is the part that usually stays buried in classified footnotes. If Antoni Kocjan hadn't stolen that rocket, British intelligence predicted they wouldn't have understood the V-2's guidance system until late 1945. Historians now estimate that without the Lombard reports and the physical parts from Operation Most 3, Hitler would have been able to launch his vengeance campaign 2 months earlier, and with double the accuracy. Imagine London not hit by 1,300 rockets, but by 3,000. Imagine the V-2s hitting the docks of Antwerp with surgical precision, cutting off the Allied supply lines during the Battle of the Bulge. The war in Europe could have dragged into 1946, and in that timeline, the first atomic bomb might not have fallen on Hiroshima. It might have fallen on Berlin, or worse, a German dirty bomb might have reached London. Antoni Kocjan didn't just save a city, he saved the timeline of the 20th century, but history is often a cruel master to its greatest heroes. Remember how I told you Kocjan refused his seat on the plane? He stayed in Warsaw. He believed his duty to the resistance wasn't over, but the Gestapo was closing in. On August 13, 1944, just weeks after the Dakota lifted off from that muddy field, Kocjan was arrested during the Warsaw Uprising. They took him to the Pawiak prison. They knew who he was now. They knew he was the man who had poisoned their rocket program. For days, they tortured him. They wanted names. They wanted to know who else had touched the Holy Grail. Kocjan, the architect of silence, lived up to his name. He didn't say a word. He didn't give up a single member of the Lombard network. On August 16, 1944, Antoni Kocjan was executed in the ruins of the city he fought to protect. He was 42 years old. He died never knowing if the plane had even made it to London. He died in the dark, a peasant, engineer who had outplayed the greatest rocket scientists in the Third Reich. But here is the final mind-blowing twist in the story of the man who stole the missile. After the war, the Allies captured the man behind the V-2, Werner von Braun. The U.S. didn't hang him. They put him to work. They took the same technology that Kocjan had dismantled in a barn, the same gyroscopes, the same turbopumps, the same liquid fuel concepts, and they used them to build the Saturn V. The V-2 was the grandfather of the rocket that took Neil Armstrong to the moon. Think about the irony. The weapon Hitler built to enslave the earth became the vehicle that allowed humanity to leave it. And that transition only happened because a group of Polish amateurs proved that no matter how advanced a weapon is, it is nothing compared to the ingenuity of people who refuse to be conquered. Today, if you drive through Poland, you won't find many statues of Antoni Kocjan. He isn't a household name like Churchill or Eisenhower. But every time you look at a GPS map on your phone, technology that relies on rocket-launched satellites, or every time you see a photo from the lunar surface, you are looking at Kocjan's legacy. He was the man who looked at Hitler's God machine and saw a pile of parts. He was the man who laughed at the impossibility of the task. And as First Sergeant Leonard Funk said in that Belgian farmhouse years later, he did what he had to do. That's it. The story of the V-2 heist is a reminder that in the darkest hours of history, the smallest light, a single engineer, a pile of potatoes, a muddy field, can change everything. If you found this deep dive into the rocket thief incredible, hit the like button. It helps us keep these forgotten stories of heroism alive. And tell me in the comments, if you were in that muddy field with the SS closing in, would you have stayed to push the plane, or would you have run? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. This is World War II Veals, and this was the man who fueled Hitler's downfall. Thanks for watching.